big announcements during the week, one with Google and the other one with Facebook. And I'm just wondering to myself, how are they likely to affect each and every one of us, especially these days when we're so connected with all our devices? I thought we'd go to a professional, a lawyer who understands his way through the media law. His name is Mark Williams and he joins us on TheInformer. How are you, Mark?
Very well, thanks, George. How are things with you in lockdown?
Well, I've been instructed to only go here, there and not everywhere. And I'm trying to obey all those requirements and at the same time get about and do what we need to do. The important thing is that we are getting closer, ever closer to an easing of those restrictions. I hope they come sooner rather than later. What are we to make of Facebook and Google, their battle against what it seems to be everybody else that wants to crimp their style?
I think this is going to be a long game of three-dimensional chess, if you know what I mean. You know, Facebook started by moving fast and breaking things. And needless to say, a lot of governments around the world and other forces, including the big media giants, were quite happy with the way things were. And those forces are marshalling back again. I think this particular process that the Australian government has started, and they announced it back in May, then they had a consultation process, that finished in 31st of July, then they put out this draft legislation inviting comments, and that finished last Friday, the 28th of August. And now we are into the battle for hearts and minds before Parliament goes in with what the Treasurer hopes is going to be a big stick. But there's going to have to be a move after that and a move after that and almost certainly a move after that. Being a strategist on both sides of this must be rather good fun.
And also quite a great way to get rewarded. They're going to be playing for enormously huge dollars and influence, which means that their budget will be a very big one as well.
That's right. And also the interesting thing was that Facebook and Google released all of their comments to journalists in New York. They didn't actually bother to talk to anyone directly in Australia. They are playing this as part of a global game.
Well, what also we saw with every update that you're now required to do, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Google, Instagram or whatever, we're now getting a new series of very, very well sorted fine print, and we're being asked to read it through. What are people like with fine print though?
Historically, people have been very poor with fine print. And certainly most of them don't realise that when they enter a contract with Google or Facebook, by and large, the legal system they're agreeing to is either Californian law, which has a totally different basis to the way Australia or the rest of Europe works, or in some cases when it comes to money, the law will be those of Ireland or some other quite distant place having nothing to do with Australian law.
Mark Williams, why would they use a strategy like this?
Well, there's a lot to play for.
Wouldn't clear speech be a simpler and more modern approach to this, or is this game of keepings off more important to them than actually, you know, prosecuting their case with great clarity and conciseness?
Well, this is where property meets freedom. The news outlets quite rightly say they have to spend a lot of money putting together accurate, balanced news coverage. The social media people have always said they're not responsible for the message. They run at most a switching service which allows people to get in touch with one another, and that they're really in the business of sharing cat videos. that for them, they're trying to downplay the benefits they get from people sharing news on their social platforms, and they're actually saying they drive more traffic to the legitimate and pay-per-view news outlets than is being taken away from the news outlets. That's, as far as the news outlets are concerned, a pretty hollow argument, particularly when we see AAP biting the dust after 90 odd years. It's just been rescued as a not-for-profit foundation. We see BuzzFeed setting up and then almost certainly or almost immediately biting the dust. And even the real giants like Reuters and those who've been fundamental to collecting accurate news for the last 100 or more years are all having their models completely crunched by the immediacy of social media. And, you know, the social media are doing gangbusters on the NASDAQ on the basis of advertising revenue, which has clearly been taken away from those news outlets.
Mark Williams, on your reading of the tea leaves, how do you think this is likely to go? I know you've talked about, or you mentioned earlier, that this is going to be a long case, but what would be a fair outcome? What would be a fair representation of the challenges that both sides have in their corner?
Well, the Australian government's trying to force the parties to a commercial negotiation. I mean, they make no bones about this. I've never seen legislation really like it that just says, you two get into a tent and thrash out a deal. And, you know, if we don't, we'll start forcing you to divulge algorithms, forcing you to divulge your advertising content, forcing you to divulge what feeds you take from news and where you disseminate it. So it's a very big stick. There are potential constitutional challenges about taking away someone's legitimate right to earn their living, doing something that no one else thought of. That's the social media argument. Likewise, the news companies are saying, well, you're taking away our property, you should be paying a fair price for that. So the fact the government's trying to force people into something like a copyright negotiation, something like the way the radio stations and the record companies have to deal with the composers negotiating with Aperen every year, or the publishers and the authors have to negotiate with universities and things through the Copyright Agency. They're not actually going to set up an authority yet. It's going to be done through the Australian Communications and Media Authority, but it is a really old-fashioned way of banging heads together, which is more the kind of way you'd see a Liberal government doing it than a Labor government. I think a Labor government would probably have just imposed a communications authority mandate on top of all of this. But, you know, this is going to go through several political cycles, no question.
Before I let you go, something that's been very interesting has cropped its head up, and I just want to see what your take is on it. We've seen a couple of arrests recently after people were found to have made, threats to kill and threats to maim and a number of other threats on social media. And it comes out of a very ugly scene in Queensland where no, it wasn't successful. The very pained expression on the face of the Broncos coach when he had to step away from what was a 5-year contract. His team's had a terrible year, but he's been abused in the most obscene way. And he finally, as he resigned, took the money. He went to the police and he said, look, there are half a dozen names here that you need to reach out to and make some decision. And in fact, the police took the advice, went and arrested a couple of them. So it's a very interesting change in what we've seen. We've had people hide behind avatars. We've had people hide behind different monikers. And we've said time and time again, the law needs to change to reflect that you can't hide behind saying a whole host of things. If you want to say something, it needs to be you who says it. What do you make of that? Are we seeing a change in the law? Are we seeing an inclination by government now and authorities to actually prosecute people who not only take the law into their own hands, but truly misbehave?
Yeah, and I think you've got to get back to fundamentals here, that it's incitement to violence or inciting others to engage in violent acts, or in the case of some of these COVID-19 protests, acts which are going to be contrary to the benefits of mass public health. Those are going to be situations where the authorities are going to jump on people. Speech itself, freedom of political communication, we've still got that enshrined in our constitution. There are going to be these fine lines all the way along. Am I protecting my civil rights? Am I actually inciting people to overthrow the government by violent means or take violent action against other people? The fact that people have been hiding behind anonymity now for a long time and hate speech has become more and more violent is going to come to an end. The freewheeling days of a happy internet where everyone was lovely to one another are long gone. Cyberspace is like other public space, and people have got to understand that, if their mother knew they were doing it, it's probably wrong. I don't want to be flippant about this. It's a serious problem for all democracies. It's a serious problem in totalitarian states in a different measure and from a different angle. We shouldn't confuse which one of the ones we're living in. We should also be working our darndest to ensure that we continue to live in the democratic state and not by default tip over into the autocratic one. But it's a very difficult.
I was going to add this other rider, and that is we're struggling with growing mental health issues. We've seen bullying take on a whole new wave of energy. There are people out there who are simply taking advantage of this new technology to abuse and to cause enormous angst in the lives of other people. They shouldn't have a right to, and yet it seems to me that the very owners of these devices and these platforms are very happy to allow us to take potshots at one another, without any serious play at trying to pull them back and say to them, if you're going to be in a public space, behave.
Yeah, look, it's a at least 20-year debate. Of course, for 60 years before that, using the telephone for defrauding people or conducting threats or conducting rackets against people has been illegal. This is no different. People just seem to forget that they have a IP address on every computer. The bad guys will try and hide where they're coming from. The good guys, the white hats, if you like, are trying to roll that up. In between times, there is definitely a realm where the pseudonymous, the anonymous, should be allowed to speak truthfully, honestly, and non-violently. But all of these other manipulative ways that are coming both from state actors and from individuals who think they're trying to game the system are problems for democracy. No question that we are in a really interesting, problematic period for democracy. But in history of Western civilization anyway, we've been there before.
Mark Williams, we have been there before, absolutely right, and we're going to come back and meander through some of these topics in the near future again. Thank you for helping us and for giving us another take on how to see things. Mark Williams joining us on The Informer.